The day they taped a $200 fine to my daughter's wheelchair ramp was the day I measured 3 times, bought the deed under their feet, and turned their rules into mulch. My name's Evan Miller. I'm 41, hands like wrenches, voice like a Sunday morning after the storm passes. I grew up in Indiana where you keep your nails clean but your tools dirty, where you fix what's broken and carry what's heavy without announcing it. My dad framed houses until his knees said enough, and my mom worked the books at the hardware store on Main. We didn't have much, but we had enough, especially enough pride to never let a neighbor feel small if we could help it. 8 months before any of this, a man on his phone drifted into our lane and turned my life into a before and after. My wife, Grace, died in the time it takes to misread a text. Our daughter, Lily, 10 years old with a braid and a laugh like a wind chime, survived with a spinal cord injury. Hospitals became home. Machines hummed where lullabies used to be, and I learned how grief sounds at 3 in the morning, somewhere between a prayer and a dropped wrench. When Lily came home, the old map of our life didn't fit. I did what I knew how to do. I pulled a permit. I sketched a ramp. I bought boards that didn't splinter and screws that didn't back out. I sanded every edge until it felt like a promise. The slope was 112 on the nose. The handrail was smooth as a handshake, and when Lily wheeled down it for the first time, she lifted her face into the sun and said, "It smells like a tree." I laughed. A laugh that felt like finding my own voice again after months of speaking only in whispers. 3 days later, there was an envelope tucked under our mat like something ashamed to be seen. "Notice of violation," it said in a font that tried too hard. "The ramp negatively impacts the architectural harmony of our community. Remove immediately. $200 per day." It was signed by the HOA president, Donna Pike, the same woman who drives a golf cart with an amber beacon like she's escorting a parade of common sense. I called the number. "Compliance office," a voice answered, crisp as celery. "This is Evan Miller on Sparrow Court. I got a letter about my daughter's ramp." Papers shuffled. "You'll need to submit an architectural request. The city approved it." "We're not the city, sir." "I noticed. There's a process. The committee meets quarterly. It's May. Late summer. My daughter can't hover till August." "Rules are rules," she said. "You wouldn't want chaos." "Ma'am," I said, steady. Chaos was a man drifting over a center line. A ramp is order. She scheduled me for a hearing. The clubhouse looks like a barn that got into a college it didn't belong in. For board members in matching vests. Donna in the center, smiling with her mouth but not her eyes. I brought Lily because I wanted them to see what they were fining, not a photo on a form. She wore a blue ribbon in her braid and sat taller than all of them. "We're sympathetic," Donna said, "but the front elevation of your home is part of the community's visual promise." "What does that even mean?" I asked. "People buy into a look," Lily whispered. "Dad, I can go around back if it's easier." "You will not sneak into your own home," I told her, and something in my chest clicked into place. They fined us anyway, doubled the rate for non-compliance. They stapled a neon placard to our post like the ramp was condemned and sent a volunteer named Chip to take pictures like we were a crime scene. The neighborhood Facebook group went feral. "We all have to follow the rules. If we allow this, what next? Pink houses?" A couple neighbors brought casseroles and apologies that felt like they came with strings. The newsletter called us a cautionary tale, next to a silhouette of a ramp. It warned about liens and litigation like they were weather forecasts. They spelled my last name wrong but nailed the threat. I went to another meeting and asked for reasonable accommodation under federal law. Donna said, "We're happy to consider a side entrance ramp with screening." I said, "My girl has the right to use her front door." A man with eyebrows like hedgerows said, "No one's questioning your situation, but aesthetics matter." I repeated it back, slow. Aesthetics matter. To who? The mailman? The cardiologist who lives on Bluebird? Or the folks who think price tags go on dignity? They voted 4-0. I went home and didn't punch a wall. I made coffee and opened the HOA's covenants, conditions and restrictions, the CC and RS, like they were blueprints to a house I had to rebuild from the studs out. I read until the words felt like sawdust in my teeth. Declarant rights, architectural control, easements, assessments. Buried in there were seams, and I know seams. If you know where a wall carries weight and where it's just pretending, you know where to push. The county recorder's office smells like paper and patience. A clerk named Rita, with a laugh like bubble wrap, pulled parcel maps and deed books. "You're the 5th person this month about that HOA," she said. "They're enthusiastic." The developer who built our subdivision, Morningside Partners, had recorded a master deed with special declarant rights. The right to appoint the board and control architectural approvals until either enough lots sold or a certain date passed. Only the date never passed properly because the developer went belly up, and the rights got shoved into a banker's closet labeled miscellaneous. On a beige map, I saw 2 parcels with little red flags, the retention pond and the clubhouse. Taxes unpaid for 2 years. The HOA had been sending glossy letters and forgetting basic arithmetic. There was more. The HOA corporation had missed a couple of annual state filings and been temporarily dissolved before they scurried to reinstate it. Actions they took during that gap? Let's just say wobbly in the kind of way that makes judges adjust their glasses. At night, I read the Fair Housing Amendments Act and the ADA until reasonable accommodation was tattooed behind my eyelids. Inspector Parks, a man who walks with the quiet of someone who's seen everything twice, came by after anonymous complaints. He put his level on my ramp, nodded and said, "You've got a better grasp of code than most contractors. Then, lo, your permit's clean, and you've got federal law on your side. Help shows up once you start making room for it." Mrs. Nguyen from 2 doors down brought sticky rice and mango and a story about how her husband fought for curb cuts in the 90s. "People think ramps are ugly because they don't need them," she said. "Someday they will." A retired property lawyer named Hal met me at the diner off Route 9, slid my documents around like chess pieces, and grunted. "They've overplayed their hand," he said. "That developer bankruptcy left orphaned rights. The branch thinks it's the tree." A Marine vet named Caleb rolled up with shoulders like anchor rope. "I'm not your mascot," he said deadpan. "But if a courtroom needs to hear what it's like to crawl into your house to placate a committee, I can be extremely educational." Rita called to tip me about a tax lien sale. "If you're going to do something," she said, "wear your good boots." There was also a uniform commercial code sale from the bank that acquired Morningside's leftovers, a box of intangible rights with a label so boring it could put a caffeinated teenager to sleep. That's where the gold was. The day of the tax lien sale, the air bit like it had opinions. Folks in coats lined up with envelopes. The retention pond and clubhouse came up, and I bought the liens with a cashier's check and a heartbeat so loud I could hear it in my ears. Weeks later, in a gray conference room with coffee that tasted like regret, I bid on the developer's intangible rights. The HOA's property manager was there, whispering into Donna's phone, trying to decide if I was bluffing. I wasn't. The numbers weren't cheap, but they were fair for what I was buying. The original blueprint for power. The gavel hit. I owned the special declarant rights. The right to appoint a majority of the board until a proper transition, a transition that had never actually occurred. The right to control architectural approvals within the bounds of law. The right to call meetings and adopt amendments that aligned with state and federal statutes. We recorded the assignments. The ink dried. The HOA didn't redeem the tax liens by deadline, so the pond and clubhouse deeds landed in my hand like a keychain that had been missing from my pocket for years. I mailed certified notices with return receipts. Hal drafted letters that felt like cool water on a fever. Then I called a meeting in the clubhouse I now owned, because life occasionally hands you the perfect amount of irony and it'd be rude not to use it. The notice was plain: special meeting of members. Governance, architectural review, accessibility policy, and common area ownership. Donna tried to cancel it in an all-caps email. Hal replied with case citations that could stop a train. An hour before the meeting, I drove my old pickup around the block, hand-collecting proxies from folks who'd slipped them under my door with notes like, "About time," and "Please don't let them tow my wife's lift van again." The clubhouse smelled like damp carpet and coffee. Folding chairs filled. Some neighbors came fired up. Some came for cookies. Donna sat in front, jaw set like a vice. I stepped up and the mic caught my voice clean. Good evening. I'm Evan Miller from Sparrow Court. I'm the guy with the ramp. A few laughs, a couple claps, some crossed arms. I called this meeting as the holder of the special declarant rights recorded last week. That sentence was a mouthful, so here's the simple version. For years, this board has been exercising powers they didn't legally hold and enforcing rules that conflict with state and federal law. We're going to fix it. Donna stood. You don't get to, someone from the back said. Sit down, Donna. With the casual authority of a man who's replaced 1,000 roofs. First, I said, reasonable accommodations for disabilities are not subject to aesthetic veto. That's not my opinion. That's the law. Effective immediately, all fines related to accessibility features are rescinded. If you paid, you'll be refunded. If you were threatened with liens over a ramp, those threats are void. A quiet, then applause that grew until people were wiping their faces like dust had blown in. Second, taxes on the pond and this clubhouse went unpaid. I bought the liens. I hold the deeds. We'll work with the city to treat these as what they are. Public spaces for the people who live here. Not leverage for letters. You are welcome here. Bullies are not. You can't do this, Donna said, color high. We'll sue. You can, I said, steady. And you'll be suing the person who cleaned up your taxes and filed your paperwork properly. You'll be suing in a courtroom where Caleb will testify about crawling into his own house to keep a committee comfortable. Caleb lifted a hand like he was hailing a cab. I bring pictures, he said. Laughter softened the edges of the room. Third, I continued, under the rights I hold, I can appoint a majority to the board until proper transition. Here's the new board. Mrs. Nguyen, because she remembers people before rules. Mr. Patel, an engineer who reads drainage reports like love letters. And Ms. Ortiz from Maple, who grows roses and runs meetings without turning them into exorcisms. Some clapped. Some booed. A man muttered tyrant, like he'd ordered the wrong flavor and wanted to complain to the chef. I kept going. Fourth, we're voting to amend the CC and RS. No fines for accessibility, period. Aesthetics enforcement limited to true eyesores, not compassion. A clear pathway to dissolve this HOA if a supermajority wants it, with a plan to deed the common areas to the city for $1 and a maintenance agreement baked in. Hands went up. Can we paint doors red? No goats, right? Will the pond smell? Does the pool stay open later? Yes to doors within reason. No goats. We'll maintain the pond like grown-ups. Pool hours go to the new board. Then Donna did the most helpful thing she's ever done. She snapped. You people think you want freedom, she shouted, voice hitting a note best heard by dogs. But what you want is anarchy. Without rules, this place will turn to trash. Property values will plummet. We need standards. Mrs. Nguyen stood, 5 feet of absolute clarity. Standards like billing a 10-year-old for using her front door? She asked. Standards like fining a veteran for a handrail? Your standards are mean. A murmur. Then applause. Then, because we're Midwestern, someone offered Donna a tissue. She tore it in half and didn't use it. We took the vote. Hal counted like a man who likes math more than noise. We crossed the supermajority needed to amend the covenants. We set a second vote to dissolve, contingent on the city accepting the common areas. I said I'd deed the pond and clubhouse for $1 and a covenant that accessibility isn't a favor here. It's a foundation. Kiddo, I said, looking at Lily in the second row, ribbon bright as a flag, you want to do the honors? She wheeled up, took my hand, and said into the mic, my name is Lily. I like science and grilled cheese. Thank you for letting me use my front door. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath since the first for sale sign went in the ground. The city council accepted the deeds. Inspector Parks shook my hand. You just saved our parks department a year of arguing, he said. We formed a maintenance district that treats common areas like what they should be. Places for kids to chase fireflies and for old men to talk about fishing, not leverage for letters about mailbox heights. The pond got a fountain that makes it look like somebody bothered to love it. The pool opened on time. The lifeguard got a raise because pennies belong where they count. In August, under string lights and over tables groaning with potluck casseroles, we held the second vote. People signed with a flourish or a shaking hand, and the HOA, as a corporation with teeth and a taste for its own, dissolved. We started a voluntary neighborhood association that hosts picnics, coordinates yard sales, lends ladders, and helps widows fix fence boards after storms. No fines. No anonymous tattling. Just neighbors. Donna resigned before the vote could fire her. She sent a letter that fenced off blame. "I did what I thought was best," she wrote. I believe her. People confuse control with care, and fear with standards. She moved to a gated community 2 towns over. I hope the gate remembers to open for the right reasons. We bolted a small brass plaque to the ramp. Built with love. Kept by law. Used by everyone. People run their hands along the rail like they're reading a story in Braille. Chapter 1, the day somebody said no. Chapter 2, the day a lot of somebodies said yes. A new family moved in down the block. A girl with pink spokes and a smile like sunrise. Her mom found me by the mailbox. "We almost didn't buy here," she said. "Then we heard about you. About the neighborhood," I corrected. A week later, Chip from the visor came by holding a pie his wife made, standing on the ramp like it might bite him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was doing what I was told." "We all were," I said. "You want to help install 2 more ramps this weekend?" He nodded. "Yeah, I do." We built them shoulder to shoulder, sweat turning into something solid you can hold, the kind of labor that makes a place yours in all the right ways. I saw Donna once in the cereal aisle. She hesitated, then turned. We both managed the Midwestern smile that says the hatchet is buried. Handle down, and we'll walk around it. "I never wanted kids to be hurt," she said. "Me neither," I said. Outside, the sky did that Indiana blue like a freshly washed truck. I drove home past the new curb cut at our corner, parked, and Lily rolled out the front door like she was born to. We went for ice cream. She got sprinkles. I got peace. If you're looking for a lesson in all this, it's simple. Bullies in blazers crumble under paper and sunlight. The law, slow and boring as it can be, exists for moments just like the one where someone with a pen tries to shrink your doorway. Community isn't matching shutters. It's the neighbor with a drill who shows up because you don't have one. The day they find my daughter's doorway was the last day I let small people guard big doors. Measure straight, stand your ground, and it's amazing what you can take down, and what you can build in its place. The morning they slapped a fine on my mother's wheelchair ramp, I learned how to buy dirt out from under people who mistake power for purpose. I set my coffee down, measured the rise twice, then measured my patience, and decided it was time to own the ground their rules stood on. My name is Tessa Nolan. I'm 38, an ICU nurse by trade and a carpenter's daughter by blood. I grew up in a small Ohio town where your reputation is your currency and your neighbors are your resume. My mother, Eileen, drove a school bus for 26 years and knew every kid's birthday and which ones kept granola bars in their backpacks for classmates. A year after my dad died, Mom's knees began to go. Then the doctors said arthritis wasn't the main suspect. Rheumatoid, then neuropathy, then the word you don't want to hear when you're already tired, progressive. Stairs became cliffs. Pride became something we learned to fold carefully and store on a higher shelf for later. I moved Mom in with me when the house got too big and the steps too tall, and we picked our subdivision for the sidewalks and the tree-lined streets that reminded her of routes she'd driven when mornings smelled like diesel and crayons. I pulled a simple permit from the city, then built a ramp the way my father taught me. Plumb, square, every screw sunk, every edge sanded smooth. When Mom rolled out the front door for the first time and the October sun warmed her cheeks, she closed her eyes and said, "Smells like cedar and second chances. If grief has a flip side, that was it." 3 days later, there was a fluorescent orange placard tacked to the post like a hunting tag on a deer. Violation. Unapproved structure. A letter in the mailbox doubled down. Remove immediately. Fine. $150 per day. It was signed by the HOA president, one Mr. Randall Carr, a man with teeth too white for honest work and a tendency to rest his hand on his belt buckle like it was a sheriff's badge. He'd waved at me once from his golf cart like he was blessing the street. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered with the tone of someone who believes the English language exists to get between you and your life. Compliance office. This is Tessa on Hawthorne. I built a ramp city approved for my mother. I just received. You'll need to submit an architectural request and wait for committee approval. I have city approval. We have different standards. She can't levitate. You can build a side entrance ramp with screening to preserve visual harmony. My mother is a person, not a utility box. The committee meets in August. It's April. Then you'll need to remove it until then. Silence pooled in my kitchen like spilled oil. I looked at Mom, who was trying to straighten a stack of mail with hands that didn't always listen. Honey, she said softly, we can go around back. No, I said, feeling something old and steel-backed straighten inside me. You're coming through your front door. I went to the hearing because I was raised to look people in the eyes when they're wrong and give them a chance to make it right. The clubhouse had a fireplace that had never seen a fire and a portrait of a field that had never seen a farmer. 4 board members sat at a table with name placards. Randall sat at the center like a cruise director auditioning to play judge. We appreciate your situation, he began. But the front elevation of the home is key to community aesthetics. No, I said calm. The front door is key to dignity. The law calls what I'm asking for reasonable accommodation. I'm not asking for a Ferris wheel. I'm asking for a ramp that lets my mother enter her home like a human being. A woman to his left, hair sprayed into architecture, smiled hard. We can't have exceptions. That's a slippery slope. It's a gentle slope, I said, because sometimes humor is the only tool that fits the screw. And you're going to comply with federal law. They doubled the fine for defiance and ended the meeting with the kind of satisfaction I've seen on the faces of people who think pain makes them tall. I didn't smash anything. I went home, poured coffee, and pulled the CC and RS like a splinter. I printed the document and slid it into a binder because some fights require paper armor. I read until my eyes felt like sand. Covenants, easements, architectural control committee authority, insurance obligations, assessment liens. Most of it tasted like dust. Some of it tasted like opportunity. I learned the clubhouse and pool sat on a parcel still titled in the name of the original developer's holding company, a Delaware LLC that had been administratively dissolved. The HOA paid to maintain it, sure, but the deed to the land never actually transferred. The clubhouse was a fancy shed built on someone else's forgotten ground. Down at the county recorder's office, I met a clerk named Amal who wore a cardigan the color of spring peas and knew exactly where the good secrets hid. You're the 3rd person this month asking about Hawthorne Meadows, she said. They missed a homestead exemption and their filings are creative. We found the parcel history. The developer had recorded a master deed and covenants with declarant rights, then gone belly up in the last recession. The HOA assumed the rights without a proper assignment, like grabbing the keys from a dish and declaring yourself captain of the ship. The clubhouse parcel had a small but real property tax bill no one had paid for 2 years. Someone had assumed it was exempt. It wasn't. The county was preparing a tax lien sale for the parcel and the private road stub that led to it. The HOA didn't even know. They were too busy measuring mailbox heights and writing stern letters about trash cans. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. You don't yell when you find a loose board under a bully. You step softly and go for a wrench. At the hospital, I cornered a nurse-turned-paralegal named Dana who once sued a landlord for letting a mold problem eat a pediatric ward. Over bad vending machine coffee, she scribbled the names of 2 statutes on a napkin and circled, Fair Housing Act. File a complaint, she said. Make a paper trail. Document everything. I did. I kept a binder with tabs. Notices, calls, photos, receipts, laws. If Randall sneezed in our direction, I dated it. Every neighborhood has a Mrs. Nguyen. Ours was named Lila, retired city planner, 69 and powered by tea and righteous indignation. She had a map of the subdivision etched into her brain and a memory for every variance they'd ever granted. They denied you? She asked, eyes narrowing. Ridiculous. The ADA is a federal umbrella. You don't get to poke holes because you bought a gavel on Amazon. Randall says aesthetics. He can buy a fern. Then there was Tyler, a 25-year-old lineman with forearms like braided rope who'd grown up here and never quite moved out because his mother needed him. He walked past our house every evening and stopped to pet Mom's cat. "If you're going to war with the board," he said, "I know how to string lights and lift heavy things and keep my mouth shut." Good kid. At the tax lien sale, the conference room smelled like ink and old carpet. People wore the look of gamblers who wished they were somewhere else. The Clubhouse parcel came up. The road stub with it. I bought the liens for less than the fines they'd rung up on my ramp. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the sense that something had just clicked into place like a joint long out of socket. 2 months later, a separate notice appeared. The bank that wound up holding residual assets from the defunct developer was auctioning intangible property related to Hawthorne Meadows. It sounded like a bad yard sale sign. Miscellaneous, assorted, unglamorous. But I showed up anyway with Dana's voice in my ear. Boring words move money. I paid less than the cost of a used car for a box of assignments that transferred the developer's declarant rights to me. On paper, I now had the right to appoint a majority of the board until proper turnover occurred, to oversee architectural controls within the law, to call meetings the current board couldn't cancel, and to correct documents that conflicted with state and federal requirements. When the redemption period on the tax liens passed without a whisper from the HOA, the deeds to the clubhouse and road stub moved in my direction like migrating birds that finally remembered where home was. I didn't show my cards until the paperwork was recorded and the county's red stamp kissed every page. Then I called a special meeting in the clubhouse I now owned. The notice was simple. Meeting of members to address accessibility, governance, and common areas. Randall tried to shut it down with an email that treated punctuation like a speed bump. Dana replied with enough case law to make a judge smile. The clubhouse was full. Some folks came to watch a fight, some to find a resolution, and some because there were brownies. I took the mic and kept my voice slow and steady. "My name is Tessa. I'm the one with the ramp. Before we begin, I need to show you something." I clicked a slide onto the wall that showed the recorded assignment of declarant rights with my name, the tax deeds for the clubhouse parcel and the road stub, and the federal complaint number I'd filed regarding discrimination. No drama, just facts. "Here's what this means," I said. "For years, this board has claimed authority it didn't legally possess and enforced rules that conflict with federal law. That ends today. Effective immediately, all fines related to accessibility features are rescinded. If you paid, you get a refund. The architectural standard is revised to treat ramps, lifts, and handrails as accommodations, not offenses." A murmur ran through the room, then applause. One man in the back put his face in his hands and shook with relief so hard his shoulders clicked. "Second, the clubhouse and the access road are now in my name because the HOA didn't pay the taxes. I will deed both to the city for $1 with a maintenance agreement, so they remain public and neutral, not leverage for threats." Randall stood jaw tight. "You can't just." Lila the planner turned in her seat and cut him off with a look. "Sit down, Randy. Do you know what a deed is?" I kept going. "Third, I am appointing a temporary board per the rights I hold until we can finish a proper transition. Lila, because she knows where the bodies are buried and how to zone them legally. Mr. and Mrs. Ortiz, because they've run a small business for 20 years without a single bounce check. And Tyler, because we need younger arms and honest eyes." A woman in pearls stood up, voice shaking. "What about property values?" "Here's my view," I said. "Property values rise when people feel welcome and safe. When veterans can install a rail without fear. When grandmothers don't have to sneak in through the back. When a neighborhood is known for porch lights and potlucks, not tattling and tickets. Also, nothing tanks a neighborhood faster than lawsuits and bad headlines. We're choosing the opposite." Randall snapped the way people do when the story they wrote in their head falls apart. "You can't march in here and take over because you want to build a carnival ramp on your front porch." "I already built the ramp," I said. "And what I took over was a file cabinet full of power your board never actually owned." What I want is a neighborhood we're not embarrassed to raise kids in. We voted on amendments that night. No fines for accessibility. Clear limits on aesthetic enforcement. A provision to dissolve the HOA with a supermajority and transfer common areas to the city. People signed. Some did it like they were shaking off handcuffs. Some did it like they were backing up a truck to a bad idea and hauling it away. Mom squeezed my hand. Your father would have liked this, she whispered. He always said, if someone blocks your door, build another door. Over the next month, we made it official. The city council accepted the deeds. The clubhouse opened as a community center. The access road got a proper sign and a fresh coat of paint. The board stopped writing love letters to its own reflection and started watering flowers in the park. We held the second vote at a potluck under string lights. People brought casseroles that required no recipe and opinions that required no megaphone. The HOA, as a corporation with sharper teeth than sense, dissolved. We kept a voluntary association for block parties, storm cleanups, and helping each other when a garage door spring snaps or a widow needs a fence mended. Randall resigned with a letter that read like a man refunding a concert ticket he never bought. I was protecting standards, he wrote. From what? Lila asked aloud, and we laughed the kind of laugh that sands splinters out of a bad memory. The fair housing complaint didn't disappear just because we got what we needed. A conciliator called and asked questions with the precision of a surgeon. The result was a consent agreement. Mandatory training for the former board, public notice posted in the clubhouse about accommodations, and a small fund established for accessibility improvements throughout the neighborhood. The headline in our little paper was simple. Neighborhood chooses people over paint. One afternoon, a delivery driver pulled up and paused at the curb cut that the city installed at our corner. He watched Mom roll down our ramp, go to the mailbox, and roll back up, a movement as ordinary as breathing and as sacred as a morning prayer. He smiled. Nice work, he said. Looks like it's always been there. It has now. The last time I saw Randall, he was in line at the hardware store, staring too long at a shelf of levels as if balance were a thing you could buy. He saw me and looked away, then looked back. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he said. Then you won't do it again, I said. Start there. We're not saints on Hawthorne. Someone will still put their trash out on the wrong day. Someone's dog will get into someone else's petunias. But nobody will ever have to choose between dignity and compliance. We made a covenant with each other that smells like cedar and second chances, and we hung it on our front doors. If you want a moral, it's this: when rules forget people, people can remind rules who built them. Paper and patience beat petty power. The law is boring on purpose so it doesn't blow over in the first wind. And sometimes, if you're stubborn and careful, you can buy the deed to the very place they stood while telling you to use the back door. Then open that front door so wide the whole neighborhood walks through. Mom keeps a small brass plate at the top of the ramp. She asked Tyler to help her install it. It reads, built for Eileen, kept for everyone. When she runs her fingers over the letters, I think about the night they taped the fine to the post and how small they wanted us to be. Then I look at the ramp, the curb cut, the kids on scooters, the neighbor waving from across the street, and I realize, this is what winning looks like. Not a trophy, not a headline, just a door used every day by people who are done asking permission to be human. The morning they zip-tied a fluorescent violation tag to my mother's wheelchair ramp, I decided I wasn't going to argue with people who confuse a laminated badge for actual authority. I was going to buy the ground their clipboards stood on and teach the rules who they work for. I'm Marcus Hale, 45, union electrician, the guy folks call when their breaker's tripping or their lights flicker like a haunted porch. I grew up in Kansas where you don't call a man sir because his polo matches his golf cart. You call him sir if he shows up with a shovel when your basement floods. After my sister passed, I took in my nephew Jay, who's 16 and building a spine out of setbacks, and I moved my mom in when a stroke turned 3 front steps into mountains. We bought into Sycamore Bend because the school bus actually stops where it's supposed to, and the streets are smooth enough that mom's chair won't rattle her bones. I pulled the city permit, poured the footings, set the posts, and built the ramp myself, slope true, rail smooth, stain warm as toast. When Mom rolled out for the first time, she pressed her palm to the rail and said, Feels like dignity. And for the first time since the hospital, I slept like my heart didn't have an alarm on it. 3 days later, a man in a branded visor snapped pictures of the ramp like it was a crime scene and left a ticket on our mailbox. $250 per day? Unapproved structure visible from street. Removal demanded within 10 days or liens may be placed. It was signed by the HOA president, Dwight Huxley, a man who wears cologne to mow and treats covenants like scripture. I called the number on the letter. Compliance, chirped a receptionist whose voice had all the warmth of an unplugged fridge. Marcus Hale, Sycamore Bend, I said. You find my mother's ramp. Papers shuffled. Our community standards require architectural approval. The city approved it. We're not the city. You're not the law either. Rules are rules, she said. A side ramp with screening would preserve aesthetic harmony. She's not a trash can, I said. She'll use her front door like every other human. They set a hearing for the following Tuesday, as if we had time to argue about fashion while my mother waited on the porch. The clubhouse smelled like copy paper and cookies nobody dared to eat. For board members sat shoulder to shoulder in matching quarter zips. Dwight in the middle, fingers steepled like he was auditioning to be a small-town king. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that won't stop barking. We appreciate your situation, he said. But the front elevation is part of Sycamore Bend's visual promise. Visual promise? I repeated, slowly, like I was fitting the phrase for a coffin. My promise is to my mother. The law's promise is called reasonable accommodation. A woman with hair sprayed into geometry said, slippery slope. If we allow this, people will do whatever they want. It's a gentle slope, I said. And it's not whatever I want. It's what a doctor would call not crawling. They voted to fine me double for willful defiance and mentioned liens again, like a man flashing a holster at a picnic. I took my mother home past neighbors who waved with their mouths but not their eyes. Jay kicked a pebble all the way up our drive and said, we can move. We're not moving, I said. We're building a door bigger than their fear. That night I did what my father taught me when something's crooked. I stopped yelling at it and found the studs. I printed the covenants, conditions and restrictions and slid them into a binder thick enough to stop a nail. I read them like schematics, declarant rights, architectural review authority, easements and common areas, insurance, obligations. There were paragraphs in there that sounded like someone copied them from a developer's dream and no grown-up ever checked the math. Down at the county building, a clerk named Mabel, retired title examiner, sharp as a chisel and twice as necessary, showed me where the bones of the neighborhood were buried. Hawthorne? No. Sycamore Bend? I've seen their paperwork. They filed like they were trying to hide a body under a picnic table, she said, tapping a stack of plat maps. We found a chain of deeds that looked like a rope after a dog gets it. The original developer, Prairie Bay Partners, recorded a master deed with special declarant rights that never properly transferred when the LLC went belly up. The HOA had assumed those rights like a teenager assuming adulthood because he found a tie. The clubhouse parcel and the stormwater pond were still titled in the developer's bankruptcy estate, then forwarded to a bank's residual assets desk, the kind of shelf where paperwork goes when no one loves it. Taxes on the pond and a sliver of the clubhouse access road? Delinquent for 2 years. They think they're exempt, Mabel said, pointing. They're not. The county's gearing up for a lien sale. I learned something else. A stormwater easement ran across the HOA's favorite enforcement target, the walking path around the pond. The easement, recorded in ink older than the Facebook group, required public access and maintenance to a certain width and slope for ADA compliance. The HOA had narrowed it to save money, then find a veteran for using his motorized chair on it. That wasn't just mean. That was a violation with teeth. I kept a journal. Dates. Names. Every phone call, every picture of visor guy measuring with a bent tape, every newsletter that used the word standards like it paid their mortgage. I filed a fair housing complaint and logged a case number that felt like an anchor line. I talked to a city inspector named Arroyo who wore his years like a well-used tool belt. He ran his level down my ramp, clicked his pen, and said, "You're cleaner than half the contractors I see. Your permit's solid. If they want to pick a fight with federal law, they can, but they won't like it. Then help started showing up the way help does when you make a space for it. Lydia, a journalist from the county paper who'd written about a nursing home locking its exit door, knocked with a notepad. "I heard a whisper about your ramp," she said. "The kind of whisper that ends up in court." Big Tom, a retired sergeant with a purple heart and a right knee that clicks when it rains, rolled up and parked his chair by my porch. "Son," he said, "you got a place that smells like coffee? I've got stories and a camera roll full of the HOA's finest hours." A quiet neighbor named Rakesh, who turns out sits on the city's ADA advisory committee, came by with codes highlighted in yellow. "They're misunderstanding aesthetic and law on a molecular level," he said, almost apologetic. "We can fix that." When the county posted the tax lien sale, I put on my work boots. The conference room felt like a waiting room for miracles nobody ordered. They called the Clubhouse parcel and the access strip. I bought both liens for less than the fines sitting on my kitchen counter. My heart hammered not from fear, but because I could feel something click into place, like a breaker seating in a panel. 2 weeks later, I saw a small legal notice in the back of the paper that tasted like victory. The bank holding Prairie Bay's leftovers was unloading intangible assets associated with Sycamore Bend, including assignment of declarant rights and architectural review authority. Dwight and his board either missed it or thought intangible meant imaginary. It means power without paint. I showed up to the UCC sale with a cashier's check and a face that said I knew what wires were hot. A property manager from the HOA's vendor side-eyed me like I was a raccoon with a plan. We bid. It wasn't cheap, but it was what I'd have paid to replace a transmission, and what I got was the title to their steering wheel. When the gavel hit, the bank handed me a box of files and an assignment. Mabel helped me record it. The ink barely dried before we sent certified letters. Notice of transfer of special declarant rights, notice of appointment of temporary board, notice of special meeting. The HOA had 60 days to redeem the tax liens. They spent those days arguing about mailbox flags on Facebook. The redemption deadline passed. The deeds to the clubhouse and the access strip came my way like ducks coming home when you shake the feed bucket. I called a special meeting for a Saturday afternoon in the clubhouse I now legally owned. Dwight sent an email in all caps trying to cancel it. Arroyo replied from the city address reminding him about public accommodations and occupancy permits, which, by the way, could be suspended if accessibility violations continued. People came, some for the drama, some because they were tired of living in a neighborhood where you could get a letter about a wind chime. I brought my mother, because I wanted every sentence to pass by her face. I started simple. "I'm Marcus. The ramp on Maple belongs to my mother. Before we argue, here's the paperwork." I put the recorded assignment of declarant rights on the projector. I put up the tax deeds, the stormwater easement map, the fair housing complaint number. I spoke in the voice I use on ladders. Calm, precise, no wasted motion. For years, this board has enforced rules it didn't legally hold the power to enforce and violated accessibility requirements the city and federal law require. That ends now. Dwight stood, red blotches on his neck. "You have no right." "Dwight," I said, "I understand your confusion. It's been baked into your paperwork for a decade. But I hold the declarant rights you never properly received, and I own the ground your pond path sits on until I deed it to the city. Sit down and let's do this like neighbors." People clapped. It wasn't polite. It was relief. "Effective immediately," I said, "all fines related to accessibility, ramps, lifts, handrails are rescinded. If you paid, you'll be refunded from the same pocket the fines went into. The architectural standards are amended to treat accessibility features as mandatory accommodations, not fashion choices. The stormwater path will return to the recorded width and slope, and the city will enforce it. And because I now own the clubhouse and access strip due to unpaid taxes, I will deed them to the city for $1 with a maintenance agreement, so nobody ever again uses them as leverage." A woman in the front row, who I later learned had a son with CP, put her face in her hands and sobbed. Big Tom lifted his phone and filmed her smile when she looked back up. "Third," I continued, "under the rights I hold, I appoint a temporary board until proper transition. Rakesh, who knows the ADA better than any of us. Yolanda Ortiz, who owns the bakery and knows how to balance a budget. And Mrs. Benton, who's lived here since the first mailbox was cemented and remembers what a neighborhood is. A man with a haircut that cost more than my truck's last tune-up stood and shouted, "Property values!" Like it was an exorcism. Property values go up when people aren't afraid of the mail. I said, banks like neighborhoods that comply with the law. Lawsuits are bad for prices. Inclusion is good for humans. We're choosing humans. Dwight tried one last bluff. "We'll sue," he said. "You'll lose." Lydia whispered a little too loudly into her recorder, and half the room laughed. "I'd welcome sunlight," I said. "We're going to fix the documents the right way." Then we voted because power without consent is just noise, and I was done with noise. Amendments. No fines for accessibility features. Codified. Aesthetic enforcement limited to actual hazards and true eyesores. Defined clearly. A path to dissolving the HOA if a supermajority of owners chose it, with a plan to deed common areas to the city and convert to a voluntary association. Hands went up. Proxies counted. Halos of relief bloomed over heads I'd only ever seen bent over weeds. We passed every measure by margins that would make a mayor jealous. Over the next month, work replaced whining. The city crew widened the pond path to the recorded width, regraded it to less than 5% in the tight spots, and stamped a little wheelchair symbol at the trailhead. Arroyo signed off on new curb cuts at 3 corners. The clubhouse deed slid across the city attorney's desk for $1 and a promise that it would host potlucks, voting, and band practice, not punishment. We held a second vote under string lights, with tables of potato salads and kids on scooters. Papers passed, pens scratched, and the HOA, the corporation with sharp letters and a taste for its own tail, dissolved. We kept a neighborhood association whose bylaws fit on one page. Help each other, keep it tidy, be kind. Dwight resigned in a letter that tried to cage guilt and hang it on standards. I ran into him at the hardware store, staring at a shelf of levels like balance could be bulk bought. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. "Then don't again," I said. "Start by apologizing to the man you fined for a handrail." He nodded like it hurt and walked off toward the fasteners. 2 weeks later, the fair housing complaint wrapped with a conciliation agreement that required training for anyone who wanted to hold a clipboard in this neighborhood again, a posted accessibility policy in the clubhouse, and a little fund seeded by the old HOA insurer to help any resident pay for ramps or lifts. Lydia's headline read, "Neighborhood chooses doorways over drama," and I cut it out and taped it to our fridge where we collect proof that the world occasionally does the right thing. My mother keeps a brass plate at the top of the ramp that Jay and I installed on a Saturday that smelled like cut grass and victory. It says, "Built for Rosa, kept for everyone." Kids run their hands over it when they pass, like they're reading a story with their palms. One afternoon, a delivery driver parked, watched Mom roll down to get the mail and said, "That's a good ramp. It's a good neighborhood." I said, and meant it. If you're looking for the lesson, it's simple. Don't beg a gatekeeper who built the gate wrong. Find the deed. Find the easement. Find the law that was written for the exact moment a committee tries to make your dignity a line item. Paper and patience beat petty power. Buy the ground under a bully's shoes if you have to, then invite the whole street to use it. They find our doorway. I bought the path. We opened the door so wide the town could walk through without turning sideways. The afternoon they taped a $300 fine to my father's wheelchair ramp. I decided I wasn't going to beg for permission to use our own front door. I was going to buy the deed under their clubhouse and teach those rules who pays their salary. I'm Nora King, 42, mail carrier, daughter of a steelworker who taught me to square a corner and stand up straight. I grew up in western North Carolina where porches are classrooms and you can tell a lot about a person by whether they grab a side of the couch without being asked. My dad, Earl, carried I-beams and overtime through the 80s and then carried me through the rest. A stroke last winter took his right side and some of his pride. He hates asking for help. He also hates the word can't. We picked this subdivision, Laurel Creek, because the sidewalks were smooth, the routes were flat, and the flyer said community enough times I wanted to believe it. I pulled a permit from the city because my daddy didn't raise a scofflaw. I bought pressure-treated lumber, countersunk every screw, and sanded the handrail until it felt like a handshake. The slope was textbook, the landing was wide enough to dance on, and when Dad rolled down it the first time he closed his eyes and said, "Smells like baseball bats and old hardware stores." I hadn't heard him sound happy in months. 3 days later, a man in a polo that matched his golf cart took pictures of the ramp like it was a crime scene and left a neon tag on our mailbox. The letter said, "Unapproved structure visible from street. Remove immediately, and fine, $300 per day." It was signed by the HOA president, Beverly Hart, a woman who says covenants like other people say grace. I called the number. "Compliance," a voice said, crisp as a cracker. "Nora on Dogwood Drive," I said. "You find my father's wheelchair ramp." Paper shuffled. "Architectural approval required." "The city approved it." "We're not the city." "You're also not above federal law," I said. "He can't climb stairs." "A screened side entrance would preserve visual continuity," she replied. "We have a standard to uphold." "Your standard doesn't trump the ADA," I said. "You have 10 days to remove it," she said, like she was offering me a coupon. "Or what?" I asked. "You going to tow the ramp?" "We will escalate," she said and hung up. I went to their hearing because my mother taught me to look people in the eyes when I say no. The clubhouse looked like Pinterest got hired by a cul-de-sac. For board members in matching quarter zips, Beverly in the middle with pearls and a binder like a shield. I brought Dad. He wore his VFW cap and the look he gets when someone's talking nonsense at church. "We appreciate your situation," Beverly started, all honey and arsenic. "But the front elevation of our homes is part of Laurel Creek's visual promise." "Visual promise?" I said. "My father promises to keep breathing. The law promises him a reasonable accommodation. This ramp is a door, not a decoration." A man to her right, chin tucked like a turtle, said, "Exceptions create chaos. Stairs create walls," I said. "We can approve a side ramp with screening," Beverly said. "He will not sneak into his own house," I said steady. "We all bought into standards," the turtle said. "I bought into a neighborhood," I said. They doubled the fines for defiance and left me with a photocopied threat about liens, like they were explaining gravity. I took Dad home and we sat on the porch, both of us staring at the ramp like it was a new member of the family. He stared at his shoes. "Maybe I can go around back," he said. "No," I told him. "You built everyone else's front doors. You're going to use yours." That night, I did what I do when something doesn't fit. I found the seams. I printed the covenants, conditions, and restrictions and slid them into a binder thick enough to prop a window. I read it with a mail carrier's patience and a steelworker's eye. Declarant rights, architectural control, easements, assessment liens, insurance obligations. In the boring paragraphs, I found a wobble. The HOA had taken out a loan 2 years ago to redo the pool deck and refresh amenities. They'd pledged the clubhouse parcel as collateral under a deed of trust. Then COVID hit, assessments lagged, and the HOA fell behind. A bank in Raleigh held a sour note on our amenities, and the board was pretending the debt didn't exist while measuring mailbox heights and sending me love letters about uniformity. I drove to the Register of Deeds. The clerk, a woman named Aaliyah with nails like works of art, pulled the book and put the deed of trust on the counter like a card I'd been waiting to see. "Yeah," she said, tapping the margin. "They're in default." Bank posted a notice, then withdrew when they got a partial. "It's heading back that way." I found something else. The developer, Blue Willow Properties, had recorded the original master deed with special declarant rights, those magic words that let a builder run things until a real transition occurs. Blue Willow dissolved during the last recession. The HOA just took over. No assignment recorded. No paperwork cleaning up the chain. It was like they'd found a crown in a ditch and decided it fit. On my route, I delivered to a retired title attorney named Gus who once fixed a boundary error with nothing but a pen and a dirty look. He poured coffee and read my stack. "2 levers," he said. "The debt and the declarant rights. If that bank moves the note, ask who gets it." If Blue Willow's leftovers are in a box somewhere, find out whose box it is. And then, you buy what they forgot to guard. I filed an ADA complaint and a fair housing complaint because paper makes sunlight official. I logged every call, every photo of neon tags, every newsletter that used aesthetic, like it kept the lights on. I called the city ADA coordinator, a woman named Pilar who speaks in measured sentences like a carpenter measures twice. She walked my ramp with a level, nodded, and said, "Perfect, and they can't touch it." She also sent a letter to Beverly that said those exact words in municipal tone. Beverly replied with a paragraph about community standards and workarounds, which Pilar printed and underlined twice. "Keep this," she said. "Judges enjoy this kind of hubris." Then the bank blinked. A tiny legal ad appeared on page 9 of the county paper. Sealed bids accepted for non-performing notes secured by Lot 1, Block A, Clubhouse parcel, Laurel Creek. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I called Gus. He whistled. "You buy that note," he said, "and you become the person they owe. You'll have them in a forbearance you can write with a crayon." "Or I foreclose," I said. "Only if they decide to wear arrogance to a gunfight," he replied. I called a friend from my route who flips small mortgages like pancakes. He taught me more about notes in an hour than any podcast could. I put together a bid file with numbers, references, and a letter that sounded like I knew exactly how many boxes of cookies the clubhouse could hold. A week later, the bank called. "You're the cleanest buyer," the man said, "and frankly, the only one who spelled our name right." It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't more than 5 years of fines. I bought the note, the assignment recorded. Overnight, I became the HOA's primary secured creditor. I sent a polite letter to Beverly. As holder of the note secured by the clubhouse parcel, I propose a forbearance conditioned on immediate rescission of all accessibility-related fines, adoption of a reasonable accommodation policy consistent with ADA/FHA, and scheduling of a members' meeting to correct governance defects. If declined, I will proceed with remedies under the deed of trust. Gus smiled. "Put a cherry on it," he said, so I did. "We will also be cooperating with the city regarding any ongoing accessibility violations." Beverly wrote back through their management company in a tone that said she thought I was bluffing. "We do not negotiate with residents regarding governance issues," it said. "We will file suit." "You'll lose," Pilar said when I showed her. She sent them a courtesy warning about civil penalties. Meanwhile, I went hunting for the other lever. Blue Willow's leftovers lived at a regional bank that swallowed its assets after the bankruptcy. A polite man in special assets told me they were clearing a warehouse of developer residue. "Intangible rights," he said. "Mostly junk." "I'll take a look," I said, and drove 2 hours to a room that smelled like dust and opportunity. In a banker's box with a faded label, I found an assignment of declarant rights that had never been executed, a draft prepared during the recession that stopped short when Blue Willow went under. The bank's lawyer blinked when Gus pointed. "This is worth more than your janitorial contract," Gus said. "We paid them not a lot to make that draft real." I recorded it. Now I had both levers, the deed of trust on the clubhouse and the declarant rights that gave me power to call a meeting and, if needed, appoint a board until proper turnover. I set a date for a special meeting. Beverly blasted the neighborhood email list with "canceled" and a paragraph about rogue elements. I replied with the recorded documents and a simple line, "See you Saturday." In the days before the meeting, the HOA's lawyer sent me a stack of adjectives and a threat to report me to myself. I posted the notice in the clubhouse window because it was, in a very real sense, mine. Saturday came and the parking lot filled. Folks who never attend anything showed up like swallows to a familiar roofline. Some came with anger, some with casserole, some with curiosity. I rolled Dad in and parked him in the front. He wore his VFW cap. A neighbor's little girl handed him a cookie like a peace offering to the universe. I kept my voice level. "My name is Nora. You know me as the mail carrier. I'm also the holder of the HOA's clubhouse loan and, as of last week, the transferee of the developer's declarant rights that were never properly assigned. Which is a mouthful, I know. Here's the simple version. For years, This board has been enforcing rules it doesn't fully own and ignoring laws it can't outrun. We're going to fix that. Beverly stood, color high on her cheeks. You have no right to. I do, I said, and put the recorded assignment of the note and the declarant rights on the projector with big stamps in red. It's not a coup. It's paperwork. Small laughter. Shoulders relaxed. Effective immediately, I said. All fines and liens related to accessibility, ramps, handrails, lifts are rescinded. If you've paid, the HOA owes you a refund. We will adopt a written reasonable accommodation policy tonight that aligns with ADA and the Fair Housing Act. The stormwater path will be widened where it doesn't meet code. Curb cuts will be added at the 2 missing corners. We'll work with the city instead of pretending it's optional. A man in the back put his head in his hands and let out a sound that broke my heart a little. Second, I continued. As the secured creditor on your clubhouse, I'm offering a forbearance. Your pool stays open. Your clubhouse stays ours. But it will never again be leverage for punishing a grandmother for a wind chime or a veteran for a ramp. After tonight, when we've got our documents in order, I will deed the clubhouse to the city for $1 with a maintenance agreement so the place where we gather belongs to the people who actually live here, not to whoever found the gavel first. Someone clapped. Then everyone did. Beverly tried again. You can't dissolve an HOA because you don't like the rules, she said, voice tight. No, I said. But we can amend rules that violate federal law, and we can dissolve an HOA if the people who pay for it decide they don't want a private government in their living room. That's not anarchy. That's adulthood. I appointed a temporary board per the rights I held. Mr. Alvarez, who runs the Southside Hardware and knows what it costs to keep lights on. Janine, a nurse who's been here since the first saplings were planted. And Walt, a retired surveyor who can smell a bad legal description from across a room. We're not here to vandalize the rules, I said. We're here to clean them. We voted on a resolution adopting the reasonable accommodation policy, on refunding accessibility fines, on widening the path and adding curb cuts, on limiting aesthetic enforcement to actual hazards and defined eyesores, no more I don't like your face regulations. And finally, we voted to begin the dissolution process, contingent on the city accepting the common areas and 2/3 of owners approving. Proxies poured in. Hands went up. People who'd never felt heard raised their voices. We passed every measure. Pilar from the city spoke and said, accessibility is not charity. It's infrastructure. She got a standing ovation I wish I could have filmed just for the feeling. Over the next month, we did the work. The city council accepted the clubhouse deed and the path easement for maintenance. They installed the curb cuts and painted them bright. The stormwater path got shaved and widened until it met the line on the plat instead of Beverly's budget. We tallied refunds and mailed checks with a note that said, we were wrong. Beverly resigned with a letter about protecting standards that read like a breakup note to a mirror. The management company sent a wine basket. I sent it to the fire station. The fair housing complaint closed with a conciliation agreement, mandatory training for anyone touching enforcement, a public posting of the new accommodation policy, and a small fund seeded by the HOA's insurer to help residents pay for ramps and lifts. The paper ran a story, Neighborhood Chooses Porches Over Policing. A week later, we held the dissolution vote under string lights, the kind you buy in bulk because you're tired of squinting. We signed the petition, crossed the threshold, and filed the papers. Laurel Creek LLC, the HOA with a taste for its own, unwound. We kept a voluntary association with bylaws that fit on the back of a recipe card. Keep it clean, keep it safe, bring a dish. I ran into Beverly at the grocery store. She stood staring at boxes of pasta like it was a test she hadn't studied for. She looked smaller without the gavel. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said. I know, I said. I hope you don't again. Start there. Dad has a brass plate at the top of the ramp now. Walt engraved it and Janine brought a screwdriver. Says built for Earl. Kept for everyone. I've watched kids run their hands over it like they can read with their palms. A delivery driver stopped the other day. Watched Dad roll down to the mailbox and back up to the porch and said, "That's a good ramp. It's a good neighborhood," I told him. He nodded like he'd seen the kind that aren't. If you're fishing for a moral, here's mine. When someone turns your front door into their hill to die on, don't waste breath at the foot of it. Find the deed. Find the debt. Find the law that was written for the exact moment a committee tries to shrink a human being to fit a paragraph. Paper and patience beat petty power. Buy the ground under a bully's shoes if you need to. Then hand it back to the people who actually live on it. They find our doorway. I bought their deed. We dissolved their little throne and left a porch light on for anyone who comes after us needing to use the front door without asking permission to be a person.